that became an accounting nightmare. And it also, there was no one place that sort of held both parties responsible for what are you getting, what can we count on in terms of compensation, and what can they count on in terms of deliverables. So Laura and I had a number of conversations around how to structure a service agreement to capture all the work that we do that's being currently funded by a lot of different funding streams. She has a service agreement that I've put together and shared with her. Her board needs to approve it, so that hasn't happened yet, but she has laid the groundwork with them and doesn't expect that to be an issue. But there's been some changes in the budget, which if you looked at the year-to-year comparison, you might see some fluctuations that we tried to note. You know, this used to show up in this line item, now it's in the VSBA service agreement line item. I think it's just going to be a lot more clear and easy to account for what's exactly going on between the two organizations. So
instead of channeling Stuart, because he's not here, he inquired about our sort of exposure or risk if that funding source were to no longer be available. And we were able to understand and appreciate that there are some services then we just in fact wouldn't be offering, and we're consulting out those services for the most part anyway, things like negotiations and healthcare. And so it is really pretty targeted distribution and in VSBA's best interest in terms of mitigating risk for districts as districts insurance trust that the VSBA organization is. It is aligned with their mission to support our work in supporting school districts in good governance, in solid contract negotiations, in fully understanding healthcare and other matters that help to, like our policy services work is huge,
Yes.
to make sure we're
Risk
operating within the confines of really solid risk management and being supported as board members to do that by the VSBA. So it was a really good question for Stuart to have posed, and I think we as a finance committee felt very satisfied with the response and the commitment from the VSBA not being a big at-risk category, even though at $215,000 it's a lot of money in this budget.
So do we have any questions for the finance committee? No?
And probably I should know this, but what's Wright Jones? I know Joe Blanchett, but what is Wright Jones?
they are the firm that Chris Leopold moved to, so,
Okay, all right.
they have represented us
Okay,
in
no,
the
I-
unfair labor practice hearing, and they are part of the legal team in front of the Supreme Court. The brief was filed last week on that case. So that they are they're a firm that does work for us around collective bargaining.
So they'll be funded not only from the collective bargaining, but also the legal support fund.
Correct.
Okay.
And we may use a different firm through legal support.
I
but
just had
Wright
never
Jones
heard,
has typically been our
I know
collective
Chris
bargaining.
Leopold.
Yeah.
Do you,
It's a new firm.
do you want a motion to approve the recommendations, or is this just discussion?
This, we're gonna need one eventually,
I'll move it.
okay? Do we have a second on that?
So
So, second by Laura, and first by Clarence. So, any other questions or comments about the budget? Okay, seeing none, I assume we're ready to vote on it. All those in favor of the budget, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Budget carries. So now, Kim, go ahead with the next piece there.
Sure. So the next piece is the motion to approve the amount that would go into the formula to raise the $383,857. So the motion is the amount that would be used for the dues formula of $411,028.
Do you want to make that motion, Kim? Because
Can
that
I?
might be the best.
Okay. I move that the amount proposed to be raised by dues and used in the formula be $411,028.
Second it.
So we got Kim making the motion, Clarence seconding it. Any discussion? All right, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. So now the last thing is, budget-wise, is the implementation, Act 46 implementation project budget. So, I don't know who was going to speak to that.
I'll speak to
I
Thank
thought
you.
so.
that.
I thought so.
Half the presses for Alice.
So, first an update on the Act 46 implementation project, since we did not meet in July. You'll recall, at the retreat, I shared with you, the vision of Jeff and Laura and I as the, we're sort of transitioning into the next phase of implementation. Grants from the Agency of Education to support the work are no longer available, despite marketing our availability of consultants to support alternative structure proposals. We only have 3 contracts with districts to do that work, and we're winding down a couple others, but there really was not the work, frankly, to justify having a full-time project manager. And so we decided to end that position. That does not in any way mean that we're not going to make sure that a district that reaches out to us and wants help finding a consultant will do that, nor does it mean that we're sort of washing our hands of supports for districts. In fact, tomorrow we're hosting a meeting for MUDs to get together and talk to a superintendent who's been running a MUD in Chittenden for a few years now and has, lessons learned, and here's how it works. So there's a number of people coming here for a meeting that we're hosting to try to just facilitate that kind of dialogue and learning. And then next Monday, we're also hosting an information session for situations where SUs are combining. So there are at least 3 that multiple supervisory unions are impacted by Act 46 mergers, and my view is that not enough attention, well, the agency doesn't really understand what's involved, and folks aren't real aware of what's necessary. So all of that to be said, it's said that we are just picking up the work and making sure that as we get inquiries from people that are indicating either a disconnect with the agency and districts or a gap in information, we're continuing to step in and try to bring people together to make sure they have the resources and support that they need, which is what the project is designed to do. So we're going to continue doing that. This budget, you'll see then, relies on far less income from district contracts. The VSBA revenue is really designed to be put directly into outside consulting to support the cohort model that we have invested in. So we now have a cohort of 7 districts participating. We just hosted a webinar yesterday for districts that may be interested. We have 8 or 10 different systems on that. So we're hoping to have a second cohort come together because we think it's really, really good technical assistance to help these new folks from school boards and on the boards and in central office come together and figure out how are we going to actually leverage this new governance model to achieve the goals. Because just because you have a new school board structure doesn't mean that you're suddenly gonna become more efficient, effective, or expand student opportunity. So, that's really where the VSBA investment is pivoting to. And that's what this budget reflects. It reflects a slight increase, to the VSBA to cover our, now Carrie is solely managing contracts, and we're, Emily and I are gonna do our best to make sure the website is up to date, et cetera. So we've taken on a little bit more work. But the important thing for you all to remember is we serve as the fiscal agent for this project. None of the revenue that you see on the bottom line is VSBA revenue. Anything, once the project closes out, and I think we have, after FY18, probably one more year, we'll reevaluate depending on where things are. But any funds left on the bottom line are returned to VSBA because they provided the initial capital to start the project. Our agreement says. So the only revenue to the VSBA is the revenue you just approved in the budget, which is now for the first time accounted for clearly in the budget as project revenue, and that is to cover administrative, basically the overhead costs associated with administrative contracts and the website. So your role is really to just go on the record as approving this budget so we can tell the auditor that you've done that.
So moved, Mr. President.
Got a motion by John, do I have a
Second.
second? A second by Clarence. Any questions or comments? I actually have a question. What's the difference between consultant contracts and other expenses and outside consulting?
Yeah, I think I need to change outside consulting. We were gonna do that as cohort expenses. Consultant contracts are the contracts that we have with, Peter Clark, Steve Dale, the consultants that actually work with districts. Outside consulting, that needs to be changed. That's the, contract that we have with district management group, primarily has been the other, consulting group that we've used. So that $250,000 is going into the cohort.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question, tell me if it's not related to this, but, Nicole, you mentioned the agency. I mean, and I'm hearing this from people in the field. Is there lack of involvement because they're overwhelmed, or have they just intentionally moved on to other issues and not? Because it does seem like the SBA and others are picking up stuff that, as a former state board member, I traditionally would have thought the agency would do.
Yes, that is true across the board. And I can't quite get a handle on whether that's a capacity issue. That's what they say it is. They say they don't have capacity to do it.
I think there's doubters out there. I'm not, it's okay.
Donna Russo-Savage, I think, has done a tremendous job and has taken on a lot and has gone out to, all corners of the state to work with communities. So my statement's not a reflection at all on her.
And I'm not pursuing
her
it as negative,
contributions.
I just,
But what I will say is in every area of work we do, we have to constantly actually hold ourselves back from stepping in to fill a void that the agency has left. And I'm saying, that's not our job. That's not our, even
Good.
though we know we could probably solve this problem.
they do it better.
We can't perform the work of the Agency of Education, it's not.
Good. Thank you.
Emily?
And to follow up on that, I think that your statement is absolutely accurate, and thank you for saying that we are not here to do the job of the Agency of Education. I think that's really important. It is very clear to me that they have reached their capacity and overreached their capacity. And it is at a critical point, I think. It has become more critical recently due to the governor making the statement that he wants to see them cut 2 to 3% out of their budget. Every agency, not just but it affects the Agency of Education as well. So I think it's a real concern, and I'm glad that we're not stepping in, because this really needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And that was one of the reasons for my asking, because if you're really committed to education, like people on this table are, it's easy to take and do a little bit more, to make sure that everything's successful. But, you know, this has been going on, I guess, for a decade, but it seems like, from what I'm hearing, it's gotten worse the last 2 or 3 years.
2008 was when they've had cuts since 2008, and it's, the last I heard, it was over 40% of their budget has been reduced since 2008.
And that's it. And who knows what happened with the feds, and that's a big piece.
Any-
Absolutely.
Any other questions or
They
comments?
need to take you off topic, Mr. Chair.
Just
Or-
a quick question. Bill Talbot replaced?
Yes,
Oh,
by a
okay.
woman named Emily
Burn.
Byrne, who was at the tax department.
That's what we've been saying.
That's what we've been saying.
I'm pretty sure
Is
she
it
was at the
true?
tax
It's
department.
tax review.
I sat with
Pretty sure it's
her.
tax.
I sat with her in Senate Finance a lot. That's how I know her. So I think she worked at the tax department.
I
Okay.
believe that's accurate. I haven't met her yet.
But they did replace.
They
yeah.
did replace Bill
That's
Talbot,
good. Okay.
yes.
Celeste?
I just want to ask a question about what Don brought up. One of the things our larger board is doing is looking at how we are communicating with our representatives in the state board and others in politics to let them know what we're thinking. And it sounds like the funding of the Agency of Education is one of those areas that we should be looking at and doing some advocacy around, somebody take a look at this and fix it. I mean, you can't cut a budget like that in 10 years and think you're gonna have
Well,
any
and at the
quality
same
work.
time, have incredible demands on the system.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
the amount of
Exactly.
legislation they've passed impacting K-12 that requires technical assistance is phenomenal, and yet there's no there there. There's nobody there
Right,
to
right.
step in,
So it's been
Just
cut
need to
by
say one more thing.
that was Emily Long's
This-
number, I don't know that off the top of my head.
That's what we were told.
What were you told? Just so I don't wanna,
Since 2008, they have, well, the last I heard it was slightly over 40% of their budget was reduced. But I would just say that this isn't only the legislature, this is also the administration, because as many of you may know, the agency has not been requesting of the legislature more funds. And when we, when we were pursuing legislation in the House Ed Committee, we tried to actually put in a position to support some of the work that is being done, and we were told that that position was not needed. And so it's, you know, it's really important that this is clear. The need is clear.
All right.
thank you. Sorry to
Any
keep
other
this.
things pertaining to the Act 46 implementation project? All right. Laura?
I'm sorry, I want to harp for a second, Gio, if I may.
She's not done.
Well, just, I think Celeste's point is important, and really the question of who can kind of shine a spotlight on that in a way that isn't political, because
So-
it has been systematic.
So I think this is a worthwhile conversation, but it's not necessarily germane to this topic. So I don't want to squelch that, but if we get time at the end of the meeting, let's do that, or maybe throw it on to a different agenda.
Great.
But I don't want to shut
Could
this
add
down.
it to September. Don't have time to remember.
All right, so I assume we're ready to vote on the question, the motion, which is the budget for the Act 46 implementation project. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so that passes. So I noticed that the food is ready, and we are hopefully on schedule.
We're 2 minutes early.
2 minutes
Can I
early.
use this time to just make a quick
Yes, I am.
announcement? I'll
Eat up
send-
my 2 minutes.
I'll send an email. But there's an article in 7 Days today about me. So that's actually, I mean, I was asked to do the article during the legislative session. I said I would not do that because I did not think it was responsible, given where we were in the political dynamic. And I sort of secretly hoped it would go away, but the reporter came back to me and said, Still think that this is an interesting story, so, it turned out to be, I think, a decent, article. Talks about this organization, talks about the role that, you play in the health insurance debate, and also gives you a little bit more information about me. So I'll send it to you, so that you have it, in case you have any questions, but I wanted to make sure you knew that that was out there.
Thank you.
All right, see, all right, so let's get rolling here. So we're at Resolutions Committee Report. And Stuart was to chair that, and he was not able to make that, so I ended up chairing it. And so I guess I'll start the report, but those who were on the committee, Neil, you were there, or there by phone.
I was
Emily,
phone.
Celeste, Mary Kate, so feel free to chip in. Frank, of course, Frank with the language there, he always has that good
I've got something circled on our cards.
affirmative language.
Instead of damaging while maintaining. We'll talk about it later, though.
So guys, feel free to pop in
Well,
whenever
that
you
was,
want.
yeah, I didn't
So
catch
what
that
we
one.
need from this group is, the committee did not get any resolutions from any boards throughout the state, so all these are internally generated resolutions. And we need to discuss this and see if we would like to pass these on to the membership. If we shoot these down, then that's it. They don't appear into the light of day. Unlike a resolution that would come to us from one of our member boards, even if we recommended it not pass, then it could still go on to the annual meeting. But here, if we don't pass these, because we generated these, that's it. They're not gonna go on. So either we recommend that they get passed, or we don't, or they
The
just.
meeting would be much shorter then, right?
There you go.
Taking it in the cocktails and-
That's a heck of an observation right there.
I was just
So you making a motion to deny all these deals, and you can just move right on?
I
Good.
would put a wrench in our regional meeting agenda.
Yeah.
Those meetings would be shorter too.
Well, this is a win-win all the way around.
Yeah.
I think Neil's on this one.
So I would just say briefly, without getting into any great detail, and we certainly can, I had attended the meeting, and there was a few things that, and Martin was there too, I don't know if we mentioned Martin, he was in the room.
I was just trying to pick up people who were here
Yeah,
today.
okay, sorry.
That's fine.
There's a few other people on the phone.
Yes.
That I had a few questions, and I'm not gonna say issues, but I think I took exception to a few things. I came in thinking, well, I don't agree with this, can't vote for this. And through the progress of our discussion, I voted for everything. So I think everything was unanimous, as I recall. So not that you just want to take our word for it, but if you could take a suggestion, I would say that we pass these. That's a lot.
It was a good discussion, except our chair was the one who made the motion, seconded the motion, and moved on.
Right. Much to Clarence's chagrin.
I don't think it quite played out that way. That's
I
a
remember
different
about that,
conversation.
Don.
Our eyesight ultimately appeared.
Let's move on.
I'm moving right along.
And I was
He had
there.
the first
you know.
candidate for board training.
That's
Oh, there you go.
So, yeah, I would agree with Frank that I've been to a number of these now, and it is really, when you sit around with a group of people and you start talking about them, you really do get to different levels of nuance in there and different understandings. It's actually a pretty informative process. So the first one, and the real language that will go into our list of resolutions is the be it resolved. Now, the members will see all of this language, but the be it resolved is what's gonna go into our resolutions, and that's the other stuff is background information that the executive director and the staff might have to help them interpret what the be it resolved means. And then the other thing I would say that we always need to say is we shouldn't get into a wordsmithing thing too much on these. They're, a lot of times they're intentionally a little bit vague, but it gives our staff room to maneuver around these issues. If we go into the legislature and we say, here's our position, and we've really stated it out in concrete, doesn't give us very much room to maneuver when we get up there. So we kind of want to give them guidance and a direction to go in, but we don't want to lock them into, you've got to go this path, you can't go that path. So given that, the first one's about school district innovation zones. I'm assuming everybody's read this stuff, because you've all done your homework as good board members. It was unanimously, we recommended that this get passed. It was thought that we really need to have the other things deal with cost containment measures, the other resolutions, so we thought we needed a resolution that talked about education and some kind of positivity thing. And Nicole, you can give us more feedback, background on this, because we've had school innovation district, this kind of thought has been around before.
Yeah, so as part of the agenda for world-class education, that was one of the recommendations from that platform, was to authorize the creation of these, and we hadn't really done much with that concept. And then I happened to be with a group of executive directors at NSBA, some of whom were talking about their states adopting this type of legislation as a way to encourage innovation. So I thought, oh, that's, we've got something on that. So I got some information from those states about the program. I think where I see this going is we've got our delegation that we've named, trying to schedule a meeting with the VSA, and need those of you who are on that delegation to let me know availability after this meeting. Don't leave, we can talk about that. But that would be a forum to have a conversation that's a little bit more dialed down in terms of what types of regulations we would be seeking relief from, because the legislation tends to be pretty clear about, it's not just like, the state board and the agency needs clear guidelines in terms of what the parameters are around which types of laws and regulations might be appropriately waived. So that's body of work, I think, would happen with our joint conversation.
So any questions about the first, the proposal one, the first one there?
I'll move the adoption as presented.
I'll second that.
So we have Mary Kay with the second, Clarence with the first. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the second one is one of the cost containment measures. Nicole, you want to just speak to these real quick? Give them a background of why we're at cost containment measures as an organization.
Well, sure. You'll recall that in January, the governor presented a budget that would take $50 million out of school district budgets in order to fund early care and education and higher education. And so in response, this board created a working group and asked the Superintendent's Association to participate with us in a work session designed to arrive at recommendations that would maintain quality in our schools while responding to concerns. Because that group, which 5 or 6 of you participated in, met all day and arrived at a set of recommendations, which you then approved on a conference call in February, unanimously, and which then formed the basis for Jeff Francis and I meeting with the Speaker, President Pro Tem, and Governor's Office with recommendations. And so that is not the type of process that we like to use when weighing in on such important matters that impact our members. We were caught in a unfortunate legislative timing, not just legislative timing, but timing in the policy realm. So our thinking was that because none been acted upon at this stage, that it's important to bring the conversation to the members, which is why they're in resolution form. We expect to discuss them fully at our regional meetings to provide people with an opportunity to explore. So not all the conversation will happen at the annual meeting, but that people will have had time to understand what's behind them, and then go home to their boards and discuss how they want to cast their vote in the annual meeting.
So given that there's 5 different proposals here, we'll just look at them one at a time. So the first one is the statewide health insurance benefit for school employees.
Gio,
Go ahead,
I'd like to add to what Nicole said. Having served on that group, these weren't things that we took lightly to come up with them. We just looked and so there was a suggestion that someone might be going at the ed fund budget with a meat axe. And we thought it our responsibility to provide some guidance on the things that would hurt the least, that we could help do our part of covering the deficit that everybody was talking about, if it was going to be covered. Some of these things aren't real positive for us, but it's a whole lot better than some of the things that have been suggested. So I think that's it, and I reiterate just exactly what you said, that we really debated these things. In that time frame is where these come from, because I'm sure at the regional meeting we're like, what are you people dreaming about? Why would we want to give away that? I can hear it now at the regional meeting, but at the context when we talked about it, you were there, Kip, right?
Yes.
Trying to think who else was there.
I was there.
Jill was there. But that was, I think that was real and important to look at to remember the time frame when we developed these and why. And we just thought it ought to be part of the resolution. Maybe they won't go through, but there's, I think there's need for all of them, or else they wouldn't still be here.
Thanks for adding that, Clarence. I think that the key statement you said is go at the budget with a meat axe. And so I think that's
We believe that was
that's what we're afraid of. Kim?
Well, and we've had the allowable growth limit, so we've had less thoughtful suggestions become law and impact us. And so I think the reality is, considering with a thoughtful, we've been there and done this mindset, these actually really could impact, whether you agree or disagree with them, they can impact in a way both delivery of opportunities for kids and cost containment. And so it wasn't that it was either or. I think most of these suggestions offer something that encompasses both of those and benefits school districts. So even if you don't agree with ratios or whatever, it's reasonable to suggest that actually impacts opportunity for students and cost.
Our parliamentarian would like to say something.
Not as a parliamentarian. I like to minimize that role. My vision and Nicole's suggestion is that at the annual meeting, 2 months from now, you invite a motion to divide the question on this second committee proposal. I wrote it so that it's easily divisible with the numbers. The new language I wanted to point out to you, so if you're looking at proposal 2, it says section 2, it says background, and it says new language, cost containment. That language would appear as an umbrella paragraph in the text of our resolution. So if you look at our resolutions, there are other sort of lists of proposals, and they usually have an umbrella and introductory to tie them together. So if any one of the proposals passed, it would be capped by that umbrella language and then renumbered for however many ones you only gets 5 that pass. That's how I would suggest you do it at your annual meeting.
Mark?
Are we able to do that at this meeting?
Yeah, no, it's already
That's what
proposed
we're gonna do.
that we break
Okay.
it down one by one at this
Okay.
meeting, yes. Not as a block.
Should we vote on the new language separately?
The resolutions committee did vote separately on the umbrella paragraph.
So I don't know
So then
if
we
this
should-
group should do the same.
Well, we
thing.
should then. Yeah, I think we should look at that umbrella language first and approve that, and then move on. So we're now looking at committee proposal 2, section 2, new language, O, cost containment, that language there. I'll entertain a motion to approve that language.
I'll move. I'll
We got
second.
Clarence, and we got Celeste with the second. Any discussion about that language? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so now the.
Gary has a question.
Gary?
Gary.
We're just voting on the statewide health insurance?
No,
No.
we're just voting on the
No.
cost containment paragraph.
The cost containment paragraph, okay, so
Yep.
that makes more sense to me now.
So now we're at the statewide health insurance benefit for school employees. Any discussion about that? Gary?
I'm sorry, can you refresh me, who were the motions on that?
Yes, we had Celeste as a second and Clarence as the primary.
Thank you very much.
I guess my only question was to make clear under that umbrella statement that especially in the one that we got cut in the timing in the health insurance one, that this is to start the conversation, that it's not like we have all the answer, this is what we're proposing, but it's a back and forth conversation, right? That we're giving you, the resolution gives you the leeway, because a lot of our members, at least I've got a lot of pushback from some of the members about this particular area.
You have to look at the resolved.
This be it resolved says the
Be it
General
resolved is
Assembly should
specific.
adopt the process, so you're wondering about whether the process.
Oh, okay.
I
The
think-
answer is no. I don't-
Yeah, I mean, this is,
A
my
process, right, yeah.
understanding, it's to negotiate health insurance benefits. It's not to start a conversation, because that's already happening
Yeah.
under.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
part of
sorry,
Act
but that's
45.
part of
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but this
But it's
organization.
there, I just missed it in the umbrella.
And I'll follow that. I don't feel comfortable with the be it resolved because I don't know the impacts of that. And I want to know what those impacts are going to be based on the outcome of Act 85. So it's just a little too narrow and specific for me to just say at this point in time whether I'm comfortable moving forward with it.
When you say impacts, what do you mean?
Impacts of, on school districts and communities and funding and, all of the reasons why we're investigating it, to see what the impacts are going to be. And I think it's a broader question even than just this. This is just my personal perspective, so I'm just uncomfortable with the narrowness of saying we should just go directly to, a statewide.
And that's kind of what I talked about during our discussion on the resolutions committee. The folks in my neck of the woods, Caledonia North and Essex, southern Essex, are opposed to this because the feeling is that healthcare is part of our compensation package, and if healthcare is resolved by a body outside of the board's negotiating process, then we're gonna be forced to make up the difference in salary, because that's gonna be the only thing that would, only benefit, compensation, we're gonna be able to, with any real impact, be able to negotiate. And one of the fears is that in 3 to 5 contracts, the cost of the salary is gonna go up to meet the change in the healthcare premiums. And then the boards are sitting there looking like we're spending money like a drunken sailor. So I really, I need to be clear on that because I'm here to represent that neck of the woods. And so I don't know a way to soften the language so that we're not saying that they should adopt a process for negotiation of healthcare. That's really strong language.
Okay.
As one who is at impasse after unifying an entire contract until the healthcare and salary, and frankly, we would have, I think, then agreed on salary if we were not in this place of not knowing that our revenue reimbursement from the state is going to be impacted by a particular assumption on a plan. We aren't negotiating locally at that point. And we have had an incredibly collaborative process that remains really respectful, and I'm proud of it. And I think all of us at that table are very appreciative of the body of work that we've done to unify this contract. It was huge. And frustrated by where we are right now, because they have no ability to even agree to what on paper makes sense. The analysis that we've provided is that there is not any person who will pay more. Either because the premiums are less, and by the offering of the HRA with, a formula that models on the state, that there's nobody that's going to pay more in no individual, and those who have catastrophic experiences are going to be saving, all the more. So I think it is a fallacy to say that that is a locally negotiated benefit, frankly. And I feel as though we get to a place of even the best circumstances, I would describe our process as being something that has been pretty amazing, and we're stuck. And so I think healthcare is a right, not a privilege. It shouldn't depend on whose ability to pay or not pay in our local communities. And I just don't see how this happens differently, and who is actually hurt by it if this becomes a benefit at the state level.
So, to the surprise of no one, I'm gonna support this proposal. I would definitely disagree with Kim. I think it is negotiated locally. Where it's not done is paid for locally. And so we're asking local boards to negotiate what everyone else in the state will then be paying for. And so that is one place where we can actually have real equity. Because there's not a difference in the healthcare plans. It is the same thing. There's not cost of living adjustments. There's not, wildly different plans. I mean, this is for the same reason that I supported it in the legislature, and I will continue to do so. This is one of the few places that we can actually get some statewide accountability that is fair, that does not hurt kids, does not hurt teachers, and helps the taxpayers. So I very strongly support this.
I support it. I believe that all of the teachers, wherever they are in the state, should have the same healthcare benefits. Further than that, I believe we should all have a single payer system, but we can't really.
You can't solve everything.
Yeah. And I understand, Celeste, where you're coming from in terms of once they get that, then what do we have left? But I think, so often we are in the position as school board members where, like this time around, we're gonna assume that you negotiated this contract on healthcare that you didn't negotiate. And so we're not getting the money anyway because they're assuming a different contract.
Right.
And I kind of feel like, yeah, you go ahead and negotiate it then. And I think that there'll be more resources, and it's really complex. The healthcare stuff has been really complex and difficult. So I think, and one of the things we talked about in the resolution committee is really wanting to make sure as part of that process that there's a council of school board members as part of negotiating that. And so rather than, all of us in different districts with different levels of expertise, having a group that really has expertise and yet is representative of all of our communities, I think would really help with negotiating that benefit, and also with the equity issue in terms of all teachers having the same benefits.
So that was a piece that we did add in, as Mary Kay said, that council of school board members, that was sort of a missing piece when we went through that whole fiasco with the legislature and the governor, is we didn't really have, we said we'd like it done, but didn't really have a plan on how to get it done, and now we have more of a This is who we want to negotiate. Kim, I'll get around to Don, let everybody else get a chance to speak first.
I would say, and I'm sure everybody knows that this is probably the situation, but we spend more time probably on this part of the resolutions than all the others put together. I think we're good things. I did not vote in favor of it, but I was not against it, but I did abstain, and the reason I abstained was, there've been a lot of discussions back in my area about how this impacts the salary schedule. In fact, being a little naive, I guess, as a board in our supervisory union this year, we raised the salaries significantly in many of our schools because we knew we had savings coming in health insurance. And so when the governor, or when the solution came down to the legislature, we're gonna have to dig deep and find some real significant monies. So it's a real dilemma. As I say, I was not against it. I really like the idea about the council of school boards, when we brought that up. But at that time I did abstain because I said I wanted to go back and I did talk with some people. I'm not saying that they're right, but there is that feeling in our part of the state that it shouldn't be done statewide. But I'm still gonna listen to discussion and I will vote tonight and come back and tell people how I voted. If they don't like it, well, thanks, but I think some good points. And it would be great if we could all come together, but I'm not sure we can.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I would even argue the point that, that Laura made, that this, I don't believe this is a local negotiation either. I believe that the system that the NEA has developed over the years is conducted at a statewide level.
Premise. Right. The premise is local negotiation.
Right, but the reality is, and I think that the problem is then it gets clouded by, unfortunately, I think the Democrats in the last legislative session, argued the point of local control. And in my mind, that local control had been lost years ago.
Act 60.
And so, without some measure of recognizing the imbalance, if they're just going to dig their heels in and say, no, this is it's infringing on collective bargaining rights and local control, I think that that's just not being cognizant of the realities of the situation currently. And so, to conduct, nobody's saying that we're going to stop negotiating. What we're saying is we want to negotiate it at the macro level rather than what we perceive to be these local negotiations, which really in my mind are not local.
Clarence?
I guess my philosophy would be, I'd love it if we all could do it all locally and leave the state out of messing with our schools, but that's not the reality we're living with. I just happen to believe that any teacher situated in the state of Vermont ought to be entitled to the same health care for the same dollar, whether it's Chittenden County, Brattleboro, Newfane, wherever it is. I think they should have the same health care for the same dollar. I think that's just fair. When you have a statewide funding system, we can argue that we don't like it, but that's what exists. If the statewide funding system is there per student, then this is one place where it would be fairly equalized. I agree with Neil, this local control, we haven't had that in a long, I like to think of that green book, that we all look to and have a copy of. If it's not written there, you can't do it, folks. Oh, we're creatures of the state. If we don't like it, we gotta vote you people out of office. We can't just not follow the rules. That's how the system works. We don't have a right locally just to go off and do what we damn well please. We gotta get permission from the state to do it. You got a supervisory union, you wanna hire a superintendent. What do you gotta do? Send a letter to the agency and get permission to hire somebody. Oh, we got local control, all right. Local control is Montpelier.
I always like to refer to it as local influence. That's what we have. Frank?
Just a couple of things. I agree with everything that's said. I'm glad Mary Kate brought that point back up. I look at it from a smaller area where salaries are lower, and I look at it from a recruiting standpoint. And if people are coming from out of state, it is equity. They're not looking at Burlington or Manchester over the North Country Supervisory Union. So I like that. And also just from a people standpoint, you know, being through 4 different rounds of bargaining. You know, and interesting, my mother-in-law sits on the other side of the table. I'm worn out. I am going to their 50th wedding anniversary, and we don't talk shop on Saturday, but you go, our place on the right, my sister-in-law's on the left, Cheryl and Dave are at the top of the hill, so, you know, we wear a lot of hats. And it's all good.
This resolution could bring families together.
That's gonna be a tagline. There is all. Family unity.
They're right away, it goes through my property, and I am thinking of lining it with septic tanks, but. So it just, I'm worn out. I'm really worn out, and I would consider myself a dug-in, well-read, committed, passionate board member. I'm certainly probably one of the more influential in the room because I think I understand it better, and you got people coming up to speed. It is complex, and I think for the you know, if you want to keep the school board members happier, take this off their plates, honestly.
Okay, so
I won't say anymore.
We got, yeah, just room for another comment or two. I see Flora, you want to say something?
Well, I didn't in any way want to say that I don't support it. To me, it's more about process, and I think that we need a little buy-in. We as board members are tired of this process, but not everybody understands that, you know, until you sit with the teacher, you know, they get teachers doing commercials, you know, until what I mean about putting that in the umbrella is that, like, we want to have a discussion because we don't want to get caught up. We want everybody's input, not because I'm looking for consensus, but we need to get a little buy-in so we don't get caught up and it doesn't happen.
All right, we should wrap this up, guys. We got a long way to go here, so unless you're burning to get this in, it's a new point. If I got a new Kim, because you've been raising your hand for a while, and Emily will.
I think we need to realize that Blue Cross Blue Shield is the provider of the 4 plans that are going to be offered everywhere. And it's not like the provider is unique to your geographic location. It makes no sense why it wouldn't be. And when we think about what could happen by the design of plans that don't alter considerations and change in behavior and how they're used, is that local districts could for the first time start to see a change in the premiums that they're going to be charged based on their experience. That has not been the case historically. I don't even know that people appreciate or get that. But we will have concerns that are both local and then statewide in terms of the sustainability of these plans and the premium growth if we aren't designing plans that are intended to have people pause and consider their utilization. So that is new to this conversation. That has never been the case for VI in the past. I think people need to understand that, and that being the case, take it away from us.
Yeah, we got to wrap this up here, folks. Emily?
So, just quickly, I can't argue with most of what everyone said in the room, and I have negotiated contracts for, 20 years, and only just recently stepped down from negotiating, so I'm really familiar with the process. But I just want to bring up one other thing. With our agenda for world-class education, under New Vision for Teaching and Learning, we said that the General Assembly, under legislation, we said, therefore, that the General Assembly should undertake a thorough review of the benefits and costs of negotiating compensation and benefits at the state level while leaving other facets of collective bargaining to be negotiated more locally. I feel very strongly about that, and I agree with that statement, and I still continue to support that. And I would echo what Mary Kate said. I feel very strongly that we need to go to a much better healthcare system and single payer, and I was hoping that this process would get us on the path toward that, and that's my goal still.
Process. I need to talk process at the regional meetings. That's what I want to talk about, because I try to sell this at my local level with my, my folks, and I think folks need to understand that the healthcare system we're talking about isn't the same healthcare system we've negotiated all these years. It's a different system. And so it's not gonna cost this, you understand what I'm saying? I mean, people, they're thinking back to two contracts ago. They're thinking about back to 2 months ago when the union told us to pack it and they all walked out of the room. You know, people are not understanding, the board members are not understanding how this is a different ballgame. And I'm stuck between voting my conscience and voting my membership. So, you know, that's kind of where I struggle, and I have to bring it up, or I don't feel like I'm representing them.
So I've forgotten now whether we had a motion on this or not.
We do.
We do?
Who was the motion?
I don't think.
No, we don't. No, that was the
I guess
last
I
one.
don't think we do.
I move that we approve the motion, or the resolution as recommended.
Okay,
A second.
we've got a first and a second.
Second, I'm sorry.
Amy on the second, Laura on the first. Anybody got anything burning to say that's
Yeah.
brand new? Kim?
So be it resolved, it'll be negotiated by a council of school board members to the exclusion of administrators, because one of the most important people in that room is our HR director who
We already
crunches all the numbers.
talked about this,
So what's
and
the deal?
that council would bring in whoever they wanted to bring in.
Okay.
So if they want to have finance people in there, union negotiators, lawyers,
Okay,
that's
so
their
if
team.
we're not speaking to it
The
in that,
council
when
will
we
make the
present this at the
decisions.
regional meetings, I think we want to make clear that they would have, with the support of, or put it in the language, with the support of whatever,
That's all necessary counsel.
all
Yeah,
necessary.
I think we're starting to get into,
Yeah.
starting to get a little bit to the weeds of, we throw that in there.
It's good to understand though, so that's not limiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, any other, okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
No?
Anybody abstaining? You're abstaining? So
No.
Don, you're abstaining?
Yes.
Okay,
And I'm
and so we have 3 abstentions and 1 no. So the motion carries. So the next one, I hope we can do this one a little quicker. Task force, any, Laura,
I have a question on it.
fire away.
What does it mean, that we would establish staff, so that we would convene a task force to establish staff to equalize pupil target ratios? Here's the part I would like explained.
Establish.
For specific categories of schools and school district configurations, what does that mean?
That means, okay, let's just back up a minute. This language comes directly from a document that you all unanimously approved in February. Okay, so this was not language of the resolutions committee, this was language. This resolution, however, changes what you approved in February in a pretty significant way. But that language talked about specific categories of schools and school district configurations. I don't know exactly what that means, but what I would imagine is elementary versus high school, rural versus urban. Those types of factors that would impact ratios.
Poor versus wealthy, high ESL
Well,
versus not?
equalized, again, this recommendation in the report you approved in February was contingent on the work that you all, as the legislature, authorized on the weighting study.
Right.
So the goal is to have some weights that whether or not the General Assembly decides to update the weights, depending on what the study says, but that this would be equalized pupil. So it would already account for variations in poverty and English language learners.
Yeah.
But what we're also calling for is, in addition to the weights, looking at the level of school, the grade levels, and the geographic.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear that it
Circumstances.
was not presuming that every child is in an equal district. I mean,
No,
that
but it
every
is
environment is
missing
the
a
same,
word.
'cause it's not.
Oh, no, it's not.
We've had
So-
it in the
so-
years.
It's not.
Okay.
So this is a significant change off of what the subcommittee created with the VSA. in February. That initial language talked about negative consequences, I forget exactly
It
what
says
word we
spending
used.
penalty.
A penalty, we actually used the P word, penalty, and now we're pulling back off that, so, which will be interesting dynamics a little bit, because if we approve it like this, then one of my tasks will be to go to the VSA and say, guys, we kind of changed our tune on this one a little bit. But it was generally thought around the people in the room that we're extended, the VSBA is extended as far as we can be extended in terms of leading the charge, and to now say, we propose this, and maybe you're gonna have penalties if you can't work within that configuration, is thought, that's too much. So we backed off that kind of thought and just said, how about you get assistance if you're dramatically out of the flow of what the typical school is, then you get assistance to help you figure out what the problem is and get back in line.
We just thought we ought to use a carrot approach instead of the stick to get the job done to help improve the ratios. That was kind of,
Say we talked about 2 and 3 together.
Yeah.
3 is the carrot, and we took the stick. At this.
I move the adoption.
Clarence moves it,
I'll second, Celeste?
Celeste with the second. Any further discussion? Laura?
Just because this is huge for me.
Right.
So I am in support of this because I believe that this is a statement from us that we recognize that all of the environments where students are not equal. So that we can't, okay. So I'm gonna vote in
Agreed.
favor of it because
Agreed.
of that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the third one, study of state-funded retirement buyout that conditions rehiring on achieving ratios. Any conversation about this one?
I'll move for the adoption of.
Mary Kate moves the adoption.
Second?
Frank seconds it. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Okay, you have,
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
okay,
So
sorry.
I just want to make sure that I understand it, because I'm thinking about class sizes and those that are already satisfying the ratios and the targets would not need to demonstrate a reduction. I want to make sure I'm reading it right, that if you are within the recommended targets, you don't have to achieve a reduction in personnel.
This doesn't make you do anything. This is, if the state makes money available for a retirement plan, if you're a school and you want to take advantage of that, what you need to do is show that you're reducing, you can't take advantage of this unless you're reducing your ratio of student to staff. So it doesn't mean that you can't replace that person who's retiring, but somewhere else you had to show that you were cutting staff.
So,
And if you
but
choose
I'm-
not to do it, there's no penalties whatsoever.
I know, I'm just saying, if you were already within the target ratios and you
I
want
see.
to incent retirement, you should not also have to reduce staff to be able to incent retirement, because there's a benefit to the system in reducing my cost for my $85,000
Right.
teacher to my $40,000 teacher.
So it says commitment to sustain these savings through future budgeting processes. This is a very broad conversation, and Mark on the resolutions committee talked about the need to really explore advantages and disadvantages. Beth Pierce, the treasurer, has expressed some doubt whether or not these types of programs actually work, so I wouldn't worry too much about, the notion is, do we support the state funding an early retirement buyout rather than have local districts fund the buyout as an incentive to that district not to replace.
Reduce ratios.
And
a stakeholder task
So
task
can I
force
ask-
to
Just a
look
task
into it.
force.
Yeah, so it's it's a task, so who knows where that will go?
Okay.
But this is really calling for a task force to look into that concept.
The implementation could be really complicated. How do you keep that?
Any other conversation, questions, comments?
But just say it's putting a focus on this issue, which we have not done before, and I think that, you know, as a school board member who has participated in many of these and actually had, Laura may probably knows, my school took advantage of quite a bit of this recently. It can be very beneficial, and I think that this is something we should be looking at.
We need to start the
The other high
conversation.
school did
I
this
think
as
this
well,
does it.
but they're
Can I just ask a
Yeah,
question to
exactly.
address the idea that if you're within the target range, any school or district could still participate? The part where we've added to meet staff to student ratio targets by reducing total personnel through the retirement program, isn't that assumed, like, the commitment to meet staff to student ratio targets and a commitment to sustain those savings through future budgeting processes, do we have to say it's by reducing personnel, because you're already within? I just read this to say if you're already within the targets, you couldn't participate. So it's not that I don't think a task force should exist to achieve this, but we're prescribing, I think, what would be required, and I understand that that's the incentive for even establishing a task force, but I just think there could be situations where class sizes are pretty big and reduction could be, you may still want to participate in the retirement program.
You gonna speak to what she just said?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a recommendation that we add 2 words after meet, and that is or maintain.
One of the things that came up during this meeting is that we're at like 4.7 staff, kids for every staff member. We're actually heading in the wrong direction
Yeah.
in Vermont. We're at 4.23. So I think it's important to keep that language of student to staff ratios there, because we're
Right.
heading in the wrong direction, folks.
But I'm just saying, do we have to say, explicitly say by reducing total personnel?
But are we headed in the wrong direction because it's best practice, or are we headed in the right direction because we're just adding, that's just the question.
It's
We're
100.
not reducing and we're losing student
Yeah,
population.
if we get to 5 to 1, it's $175 million.
We're just not reducing our
Yeah,
staff.
it's not,
And we're the highest in the nation, right?
I don't-
Am I incorrect in saying that?
oh yeah, lowest in the country, and I think
Are the highest.
there's a study coming out on, our special ed. So
Yeah.
we're not doing best practice,
Right.
unfortunately.
So folks, we're starting to push up against time constraints. We got a lot to get through today. So if you got new burning stuff on this one, let's hear it, because this is important stuff.
The only issue, we need to be clear that this is about addressing staff numbers through attrition
Right.
rather than reduction in force or
That's
layoff.
right.
Right.
This is actually taking care of our staff and not putting boards in the position where they have to say, last hired, first out.
Laura, did you have something to say?
I hear, Kim, I think we wanna be careful not to be perceived as trying to kind of diminish the experience of the overall workforce in the state. And, if we don't have that language in there about staff-student ratios, I think it could be perceived that we're trying to diminish the experience level of the staff. Which I don't know if that's where we wanna be.
I don't know what the process is to, I think the words I would recommend removing, if that is even a thing to do, is just take out by reducing total personnel, because I think you get the same result. Would be a commitment to meet staff to student ratio targets through the retirement program. And it doesn't say you necessarily, if you're hitting the targets, it doesn't require that you reduce personnel, but if you are not hitting the targets, then it would. Does that substantially change what we're saying? If it does, then.
Yes, I think there is a
Yeah, it does,
difference
yeah.
between, are you participating in a retirement, is the retirement program exists to help districts get to targets? Or does the retirement program exist for the benefit of anybody who wants to use it?
Yeah, that's a difference.
I'm afraid if it's too broad, it waters it down.
But if you're already at the target and you can't take advantage of it,
Then
would
why
we
should
have
the
to,
state
Then-
fund you?
Right,
Right.
maybe
exactly.
Fund you to,
because it costs everybody to have our most expensive teachers.
yeah, but that's
Lingering.
not, that's true for
It's
everybody.
still negotiating.
Yeah.
I guess the only other thing
Okay.
you could do is we used to have side letter agreements where Dick's.
Yeah, no, I know any of us could do that individually, but if a statewide offer is happening, it may not be the intent that class sizes of 25, maybe to take advantage of that and offer it to anybody ends up not offering a program, because now you've got class sizes too big. If you wanted to participate in that and you couldn't rehire a teacher, you may lose an offering, an AP class or whatever.
But this could work in the inverse.
I
It's fine,
I wonder if we're overthinking
Yeah.
this, folks.
Yeah.
Because with the lateness of the hour here,
Well, we don't control the outcome.
All we want to do is have somebody explore
No,
the advantages and
everybody's
disadvantages.
Right.
That's-
Right.
So that we're clear on what are they, rather than what we
Well, we're
think
not
they are.
one to four.
And
That's
that,
for sure. We're not one to
what
five.
Kim is
Okay.
talking about is look advantages or disadvantages. is-
so I would recommend that we take a vote on this, because I think we're overthinking this. This is not, we're not gonna create the law tonight. This is just a stakeholder task force to look into this. And they can get into stuff that Kim's bringing up. So any other comments or questions? We have a motion on the table, I believe, on this one.
Can I just ask one quick thing? You
Fire
just
away.
said it. The one we just passed before said convene a task force, and this one's a stakeholder task force. Is there a reason why we've said it that way in both? There's a different,
We can
there's
call
no,
it a Scrivener's error.
I don't care. I'm just asking if there was something intent there that, okay, thank you.
I
It
love
doesn't
the
matter
idea
then,
of a
just leave it.
stakeholder task
Me-
force.
me too,
Because
actually.
usually this gets shot down with,
Well-
we don't have enough staff. to
Well,
do
in
it."
fact, if I had thought about it, I might have thought that that was appropriate for every one of them. so.
Any other burning things? All right, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, number 4, establish standards for fact planners in the collective bargaining process. Discussion on this?
I'll move to accept it.
So we have a
I'll
motion
second
by
that.
Celeste, a second by Clarence. Discussion?
I think the only discussion, and maybe, again, you can tell it's inappropriate, Martin brought forward some ideas that he may be pursuing that would be somewhat in line of this. Am I remembering that right?
Martin, as a legislator, is going to introduce a bill
Right.
that would impact the timelines. And we said we didn't think that this was inconsistent with that, but that unless he was able to provide us with language to look at, we would just move forward with this. Because it's been the position of the organization
Because,
for a little while now.
And time-wise, he couldn't do it, but I think also that he's gonna go beyond what we have here.
Right.
Good. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Guidelines for reserve funds and budget surplus amounts. Any questions about this, comments, thoughts?
I'll move again to accept.
Celeste, motion,
Second?
Frank with the second. Any further conversation? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, excellent.
Can you assure me that one will pass at regional meetings for the same discussion?
Nope.
You gonna come to all of them with us?
Let's do that right now. All right, so we have a bylaw change. Where, so it should be in your packet in blue on page 3. And this is done to give us, as the board of directors, the ability to look into conducting votes electronically at the end of the meeting. It doesn't say we're going to do it. We can look into doing this. So it just gives us some flexibility. We won't be doing it this year at the annual meeting because we won't have this passed. But next year at the annual meeting, we could be thinking about doing something like this. We just thought it might be nice to open the door, to give us more flexibility. We'll see what we can do with it. So any decisions that are forthcoming about this, we're gonna debate, we're gonna talk about. So it's not gonna be like two people coming up with a new idea that you guys won't get to hear.
Does the motion need to contain also the stuff on page 5? The edit on page 5, just so that we're all clear we're doing
Yes.
it?
Yeah,
Should
that's a
do
cleanup,
both.
but yeah.
I will move for the changes as written.
Second.
Okay, we got a first by
Celeste.
Celeste and a second by Laura.
Don't we already have Celeste and Frank Cardinal?
No, that was the last
That was the
resolution.
last one.
That was the last
Oh,
resolution.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right.
We're on the bylaws thing.
Yeah, we're on the
So
bylaws
this is
here.
just to approve the executive committee bylaws
I
recommendation.
can't believe you're not totally riveted by this meeting.
I got pasted too quick. So it's Celeste and who is the second one?
Laura. Any other conversation about this?
What's the second piece? What does that actually do?
Which
Clean up.
second piece?
Which where are you?
On page 5, he means,
On page 5?
The second rule?
yes. It's just.
Go ahead.
Just
So
strike out.
Clarence, my first year here, we changed to have an executive committee, and that sentence that's now crossed out was something that was put in an abundance of clarity. And then when I read it last week, I thought, well, that's confusing as heck. So it is, the identical sentence appears in Article 9, so rather than repeat it, I think we should refer to
It's
Article
just
9.
clean up.
So the board still has all these powers.
Not-
Okay, it's just taking it out where it's in the second place.
It's
Exactly.
removing,
Okay,
yeah.
Explanation enough.
Any other conversation? All those in favor of moving this on to the annual meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so,
Right
good.
back on schedule.
Yeah, well, that was good, guys. That was a
Yeah.
flurry. Let's keep going. All right. No, this is really important. This is really important stuff, so I think if we have to spend some time on it, that's all right. So, the regional meeting's coming up. Before I let Nicole jump into this, I will say that, we have some areas where we need some board members running. We know Clifton is not running, Keith is not running, and Jackie's not running. So I don't know if everybody in this room who's up and is everybody planning on running?
Yes.
Good, good. So I think we really need to look around and recruit, you know who your board members are in your areas who might be good at this, who might want to do this. And it'd be great if you guys could find somebody. Someone, and my criteria is always the same, someone we can work with. I don't care if they're anti-Act 46 or pro-Act 46 or whatever, but they just have to be people who won't subvert the work of the board and work within the group. So,
Also try to not have one supervisory union overrepresented.
we don't have anything in the bylaws that says we can't, but we've always looked to get another SU.
When we get down to 12 SUs, though, it's gonna be hard.
We'll get to that when we come there, Don. You're a little bit ahead of us apparently. Anyway, Nicole.
So, we're thinking, as we started to think about the regional meetings, some of the changes that were made as part of the bylaws, I think make it really important that we set aside time to two things. One is a longer business meeting so that you all who attend as representatives of the VSBA board have an opportunity to, and I will work with you on a script or talking points, but on the changes that were made to the bylaws, how that impacts dues, but more importantly, since the dues invoices will have gone out at that point, how we're thinking about participation in the annual meeting process. Because it's a pretty big shift to go from every school district board has a vote at the annual meeting. And I think it's been pretty loose in terms of who shows up, who's at the conference and goes to the meeting. To, we now have 60 possible votes. And I believe it's really important that folks have information about what's gonna be, what the actions are gonna be at the annual meeting well in advance of the annual meeting, so that they can decide as a supervisory union or supervisory district board who their delegate's gonna be and how they're gonna vote. Or at least give the delegate some guidance about how to vote. And so we wanna explain that and the thinking around that. And we also wanna devote most of the time to a discussion around the resolutions. So that there's ample opportunity for folks to not just see the resolutions and debate, but really understand the thinking, the data, the political reality, and the thinking behind the resolutions from the organization's perspective, and then give them time to talk about it and provide feedback. And if they want, they decide someone, as a result of that presentation, they want to bring a resolution to the floor, there's time built in for them to do that. I think one of the criticisms we heard this year was that this organization isn't inclusive enough in how it sets its policy agenda. I think part of that is confusion about the process that is used. So one strategy that we're using is mailing a postcard to every school board member's home, inviting them to join us, and saying what the agenda is going to be, just being a lot more, I don't want to say transparent, because it's not like you weren't transparent, but
Just putting it in people's faces.
put it out there a little bit more, and welcoming, frankly, of people to participate in the conversation. So, these are at the printers, they should be going out soon.
Can I?
Frank and then Emily?
So we're including the word without damaging education quality. We wordsmithed that the other day, and that's being printed.
Yeah, unfortunately, Frank, that came from a different document than the resolutions, and I didn't catch it when we have been working on this for a little while.
We're gonna blame Harry Frank, don't worry about it.
Take notes.
Thank you, Frank.
See how this works here, Susan?
Show up.
Show up.
Show up, always.
Following up on what Nicole just said, and I think that's all really important, is there a way to connect our regional representatives prior to the regional meetings with a, whether it's a standard message, whether it's an email, or whether it's, what's really important is to get people to attend the regional meetings, to hear that conversation, have that discussion. I think that that's much more important than them showing up at the annual meeting, honestly. And so I hope we can think of a strategy to get people to attend these regional meetings based on this change that we have coming. And there is so much misunderstanding about how we got to this place. And I'm certain we're going to be explaining that process at each regional meeting, and how that's going to impact and how school boards are still represented. School board members and school boards, no matter whether they're on a merged board or whatever is happening, they're still fully represented regardless of how the dues are. So I'm not suggesting a specific thing, but I want there to be something that's consistent across the state.
Yep. So one of the reasons we hope for you to take action on these big ticket items tonight is so that we can send out our annual notice of meeting, either tomorrow or Monday, which then gives boards 2 full months. So they know what we're gonna be talking about, but then also helps us sort of ramp up our communications that we do. So Carrie and I can get you all, as a sort of, this is the first round. Then you're gonna follow up with a personal note to the folks in your regions. I hope you received the postcard. I want to reiterate these 3 points. So we will get you all that, next week or so. They start September 11th.
It needs to be that personal connection
Yep.
between representatives and the members.
Yep.
Do we have a good handle on the new boards? Because, I mean, at least in my area, we've got old boards and new boards, and all membership is not the same. And they're both still
We have a lot of
functioning.
new members on our new board, merged board, that
I'm
aren't on
not
it.
sure we have a real good handle.
We have all organized boards. All boards have been voted on? Is that what you mean? Like the
So
organized
the merged
boards,
boards?
They've had
Sworn in.
their
the
organizational
non-operating, getting ready to operate,
Yep.
and the ones, yes, we have
meeting. So
them.
we have all those in our systems.
Yes.
Looks like,
So-
as long as we've sent them to you.
After
Dover.
30 days after the vote.
Dover and Wardsboro still have boards, we would wanna invite all those people. And you have the Dover, Wardsboro board, new membership, which is not just those board members. There's a new board, which has other members.
A joint board?
Yes.
No, it's a merged
new
board.
Merged
union
board.
school district board.
It's a union school district, yes.
What's the name of it? Dover
Deer,
Wardsboro?
Deerfield Valley.
No,
No, it's the River Valley. River Valley, isn't it? River Valley.
I don't know, I'll.
Ours is the West River and theirs is River Valley.
Well, I would doubt that it would be just my,
No, we've been building it up over,
I'm in constant contact with the secretaries, of any board member who's been elected should be in our system.
the
Because the secretaries-
superintendent's offices keep us apprised of new
I-
members.
so I would just say, I think, given where we're at, that it probably would be good to really call that to everybody's attention. The superintendents, the old boards, everyone,
That may be a
just
job of
say,
original
We double our efforts.
please make sure that you're,
Every 2 months, I send it out. They get sick of me saying.
Right, Celeste and Kim?
I was, 2 things, I don't have, well, I do because they're on my Kingdom East board, but making sure that new school board members on new unified district boards, that people know their emails and phone numbers and all that would be great. The other thing is, what I was originally gonna say is there a way for us to live stream or Skype or something, FaceTime, the regional meetings, so that people who don't come out to the meeting in Lindenville can at least hear the discussion. And if we record the meeting, then the discussion of the resolutions and other discussion can be heard.
So that's
And I
different than
think that's-
Skype.
That's different than
Yeah.
Skype and FaceTime
I
and even
don't know
live
that we
streaming.
can commit to that because the
Right.
lives, where,
Terrible.
it's all over the place.
Yeah,
It's awful.
But we can, commit, I don't know that we,
To
I don't know if we're
recording
gonna
it.
commit record all of them, but we will record at least one and have that on our website. So Carrie has created a web page that has, all these board agendas, minutes, and a link to the video. So,
Great.
but that will be on our website, so for people who can't sleep at night and wanna watch these board meetings, they can do that. So we will have the ability we'll have a YouTube channel devoted to recording these types of events. So we can just put,
Right.
put one up there.
Good.
I don't know that we need to record
All
all of
of
them, so
them.
people can hear, because it's gonna get into small group discussion and we can't,
Yeah, you can't
that's hard
really do
to,
that.
that's hard to capture.
Kim?
With respect to voting at the annual meeting, I would presume transitional boards where their district is not yet operational, but you're seated as a board, a unified board, us prior to July 1 this past year. We had our local boards, we sat on a unified board that was making operational decisions, but we were not operating as a district till July 1. In terms of voting for the annual meeting, those transitional boards are not under a transitional budget paying dues to us yet. So we should probably make clear that while you're receiving communications as a unified board, you are voting until your effective date of operation, July 1, whatever year it is, you are voting
As
in
a
your
supervisory
local
union
boards. or,
Well, no.
well, like,
No,
in
it's
our
a local
case,
board.
we were a
It's the
local
same,
board
yes.
joining an SU, like,
Yeah.
becoming a unified board.
Yeah.
So whatever the configuration is, however it's described, people should be voting. I guess maybe we were unique, so every place else it's an SU, but you're not voting as a unified.
Yep.
You don't want to send the one person on the unified board who's not actually on your current board.
The delegates are
As a
SU
delegate, 'cause-
delegates, not
Yeah.
SD delegates.
Right.
or
Delegates, so
You're talking about the delegate.
All right, any, Laura, did you want to say something? Did your hand up? No? Okay. Mary Kate, you good? So what do you envision as the role of the regional reps in these meetings?
Like I said, you know, you guys run the business meeting, so we expect you to come.
Oh, and can I just put this in there, don't assume that I have you on the attendance just because you're representative, because a lot of times people can't go and they have set aside someone else to
Sign up.
nominate
So
them,
please
so
register.
please register if you're attending.
So we can get the food count right, get your name tags and everything.
So the last few years, I will say that Emily has come to all these meetings, or most of them, and kind of conducted the elections. I can't do that. I'm not
Actually,
nearly as good
he
as
stood in
Emily.
for me once though, so it worked fine.
So I can attend some of these, but you know, somehow we need to pick up that slack. It could be an officer, someone from another region coming, because I think it does get a little clunky if,
Can the superintendent do it?
well,
Yeah, it's a little different now, because before, when she went, we didn't have the
no, I
two
understand,
representatives.
but
obviously
it
here.
still could be construed as like, you know,
You can be-
Neil and Amy have a Loctite hold on Windsor County and are just conspiring against everybody to keep their seats.
Or you're
Frank and I
asking
can
the
have a
clerk to
fight
cast one
with
ballot
you.
for yourself if you're conducting the meeting.
I'm glad to hear you have people like succeeding in your region.
Yeah, we have competitive elections, last
We
bunch.
have
yeah.
had the last couple
Yeah,
years.
yeah, which is healthy. So,
Nicole, what have we done down Bennington? I don't think Emily has come down to our Bennington meeting.
Oh, yeah, I have.
Not to every one of them.
I missed last year's, I think.
I was there,
I think Gio went.
Gio took my place
That's right,
last
Gio.
year.
and it was a hell of a roll, because you could see how much you remembered me being there. I'm a little hurt now.
So I think this year's a little different because we're not, the presence of, the president isn't necessary, well, in terms of running the elections, but
Oh,
it
just
is
not
important,
necessary.
no, I think it's important that there's a strong VSBA board presence at these meetings, owning the changes that have been made through the bylaws and owning the recommendations that are being put to the membership at the annual meeting. This is not the Nicole Mace show.
I agree with,
And that's something that we really need to try to reinforce, that this is not the Nicole Mace show.
so I agree with that strongly, and think that if there's an officer who can go in place of Gio, just like Gio stood in for me when I couldn't go, I think you should lean on the executive committee to see if someone can step in your place, because I really agree with that. I think it's very important that we own this. We are a board, we have to own this.
So I think it would also be nice if there's a regional meeting that you're fairly close to and feel like you can attend. That would be nice as well. But
If we all try
obviously
to,
not mandatory.
if we all try to attend to two, would that cover it?
That'd be amazing if we could pull that off.
If everybody tried to do two?
Everybody got to 2, that would be, I think, amazing.
It's
You know,
really cool to
Can I
know.
like to speak there real quick? I think if we could do that, not only that would be amazing just to have the representation, but I keep, and I've had this discussion in my region quite a bit when it comes to, you know, variety of issues, but in many ways, other than this one meeting that we have tonight, and some of us aren't even there, right? We're not really speaking to other supervisory unions and have a full understanding of, or at least I feel like I'm not, I don't speak for anybody else, but, you know, for instance, independent school issues. I understand how my region feels very strongly about it, but I also recognize many of the regions feel extremely different. So, even reaching out to any of these communities, start to hear the voices of what's going on with their neighbor regions, by this, maybe thinking so differently than you are, I think could be really important, and it's kind of that great idea inspires me to not just go to maybe Rutland, it is close to me, but maybe hop over to one of these regions that are in huge support of, 2200, because that is so different than what I know. So this might be a nice opportunity to really to hear how everybody else is feeling about what else is going on.
Well stated.
I think, I'm just thinking in terms of our joint meeting at Addison Rutland. If Ken can make it, and Mary Kay, we have two people that can run the show that aren't up for reelection. That would work fine. Right? Thought Keith was up, because Keith said this was his last year, he's all done.
He's done.
He's done because he's off the board.
Oh, so there's gonna be 2 elections there. So if Ken needs to show up to basically do it, and if he can't, then somebody's gonna come from the executive committee, because it shouldn't be Mary Kay or myself or both running.
How does this sound as an approach? How about we put together a Google Doc?
Yeah.
That has.
I was just gonna say that.
The regional meeting, the reps,
Yeah.
and let us know if you are a regional rep and you're not gonna go to your regional meeting. But otherwise, we'll assume you're gonna be there, and then, additional representation.
So I would say fill us in the ones that are our own regionals, so that
Yes.
we need to actively tell you, if not, don't.
We will
Yeah.
generate something and get it out to everybody to find out who can attend what meeting, and then we'll make sure where we have gaps, either I'll fill it or Emily will fill it because she owes me.
It'd be good to,
Gary's.
it'd be good to if you could maybe put where some of these are. I know where Montpelier,
Yes.
Windsor, and Brattleboro are. I had to look up Otter Valley and Southwest Vermont. Everything is far when you live at the top of the state.
Yeah.
I'm-
Or the bottom.
Or
of
the bottom,
state.
right.
No, I agree. I think it's,
Good point.
I
Might
think
well we
it's,
have more than.
I think what we should say is that it'd be great if you could get to 2,
My favorite.
but it's people's schedules,
Yeah.
it's,
I'm just saying, I'm sitting here in a meeting looking up where some of these places are.
Oh, well, you're listed out.
I had X'd off Montpelier, and I'm thinking, well, that's actually.
Yeah.
Frank, we had you scheduled to go to Brattleboro.
I feel really positive about that. Longer motorcycle ride for me.
That's true,
Not a
that's
problem.
true.
Yeah.
All right, so are we good there on the regional meetings?
Yeah, we'll get some stuff to
That's
you
great.
guys next week.
Sounds good.
Good,
All
good
right,
collaboration.
so the next thing is the election of the VSBA president. I'll turn this over to Nicole to run the election.
Okay.
Or
Can I just
Emily.
nominate, can I just nominate Gio?
Yeah.
Please.
I'd like to nominate Gio. Gio, if you're willing to do it, I think you are.
I will do it, yeah.
I'd like to
You
nominate.
don't need seconds.
I like the second.
I
Any
think
other
it's-
nominations?
Who actually seconded?
I move.
You don't
I
need-
would,
need a
I would
second.
suggest we not have seconds, we don't really
We don't
need seconds
need
with the
seconds.
president that we have, so we just look, go ahead and vote
Emily
on
was
it.
just testing us. She was just seeing if we were paying.
You're not gonna let
attention.
that one go, are you, Don?
What do we need a second for?
What we do need is.
So-
A motion to
there's
close
other-
nomination?
Celeste
Right.
just made a motion.
I made a motion to close nominations.
There you go.
There
Second.
you go, that's what we needed right there.
I'll second that if somebody has it.
Frank already got you.
You do need a second per nomination.
That's
Okay.
what we need.
Okay. Do we need to vote on the
We need
motion
to
to
vote
close
to close.
nominations?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
That was just for closing nominations.
Right, now, we have one nominee for president of the VSBA board, Gio Heinford. I assume you've already accepted. All those in favor?
Speech?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Congratulations.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Gio.
Gio.
Thanks, guys.
Yay.
Do we throw him in the river now?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
He buys
Way to go, Emily. Do
desserts.
we have a second on
I
the
think.
approving the consent
I have a
agenda?
question on it.
Okay, do we have a second first?
I'll second.
Mary Kate with the second, Emily with the motion, Don?
I was shown as a member of the resolutions committee, and I was invited to the meeting, but on the list in the minutes, I'm not mentioned as a member, so either I'm a member or not a member.
I think you were
Ah.
an alternate.
You were changed.
We will put you
I think
in.
you were.
I think it was changed after the meeting, but I.
Any
that might be
other
true. You make it a-
comments? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with amended, as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so we have any new business. This is sort of the section where we have that people might have items that they would like us to talk about in the future. I do have one thing written down, which is the agency being sort of understaffed. I'm not sure what our role can be there, but it's probably worth some kind of conversation.
That'd be great at the next meeting.
But not tonight.
Right, before, people, run out the building, because we're 10 minutes early.
Well, no, we're not.
No, we're not,
No,
because
we
we have
have
2 more to
executive
go.
Oh, that's
session.
right, but okay, and you kicked me out for executive session. I just want to remind Amy McMullen, Floor, Mary Kate, and Gio to stay here so that we can schedule a meeting for the agenda for world-class education. I have one thing to just let you know about for the September board meeting. This looks like we're going to be joined by the NSBA Executive Director, who will be fresh off of honoring Hazen Union High School down in the Capitol in DC for their work around personal learning plans, student, what are they called, PLPs? Yeah.
PLPs.
Personal learning plans, and student-centered learning. So Tom's gonna come up and talk to us about why Vermont is being showcased as a innovator and leader in expanding opportunities for students within the public systems, and talk to you a little bit about the NSBA and the issues that it's working on as he's coming down the pike at the national level.
I thought you'd gotten mentioned the boss.
And we're also, my hope is to
We would invite
spend,
her.
my hope is to spend a good amount of time talking about how the annual meeting is going to work. At
The NSBA in a meeting? Our
no,
our
no,
annual meeting?
Our annual meeting, because we don't meet in October, how we're gonna, some thoughts we have about managing the meeting itself.
Will we have a chance to put a list together of things we want to talk to the head of the NSBA before the?
What is-
Sure, I mean,
what-
if you have something you want to him
Did you
to.
get our letter we sent last year?
Yeah, I mean, that might have something to do with the visit.
We definitely poked him in the eye.
Do we have a September meeting?
Yep, we do. We do not have an October meeting, but we have a September meeting.
Neil?
Having not been a part of this process before, how do you decide what the breakout sessions are at the annual meeting?
That's nothing, that's the
Okay,
conference.
so.
Or unless that's a big, long discussion that I
The,
need to.
like the keynotes or the
No,
workshops?
not the keynotes, but the smaller ones during the day.
Workshops and stuff.
The workshops, yeah.
We decide that.
The staff of the
Along with the
VSBA and
We-
BSA.
We try, sometimes we have requests to present, sometimes we have sponsors that have an interest in presenting, only if it makes sense. Sometimes we know of people that are presenting on topics that are related to the keynote. So it's a pretty organic process that sort of relies on what we know to be out there. But if you have suggestions for a workshop or a presenter, let me know.
That should be true for everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Frank?
Last thing, probably a prompt for the finance committee, but it's just something I've overlooked for a long time, but I think about because I deal with buildings. Office space, $23,181. I'm just curious, and I don't need the answers right now, but Kim, if you're listening.
Yeah.
And I can take my comment off the air. Just, we have the VSA in this building, we have GPA in this building?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just wondering what they pay, I'm just wondering how long the contract is for, what our square footage is, what, if we divide that, what we pay per square foot? I'm sure we do, but what is it? And then is it in our interest, considering the financial position of the SBA, are we leveraging our negotiations for rent of this space to our advantage? Because I don't know anything about it, I'm not saying that it's not done diligently and that people are just like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna,
So we own the
We
building.
own it.
okay, I didn't know
So
that,
we're
okay, I'm sorry.
negotiating against ourselves.
Okay, never mind, I thought there was a rental thing, so.
Well, that
good.
answers a lot of
No,
questions.
That's
that's
where-
that problem a long time.
Rent has been
That's where,
held
that's where,
level.
that's where I was hoping it would go, so thank you.
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah.
great, I'm
We
so
own the building.
thrilled.
I hope you like it, it's ours.
We own the
so
building
thrilled.
with
We don't own
BPA
it.
and
Yeah,
BSA.
okay. I'm
So
so,
we do need an executive session, Laura?
just out myself as a delinquent board member, when is the annual meeting?
Oh,
My calendar here.
James,
For shame, for shame.
The 19th, it's on the 19th.
I didn't,
The conference is the 19th and the 20th, but it's of October.
you haven't scheduled your whole family around that?
Usually it's Halloween.
I'm trying to put it in.
Yeah, it's usually the last.
See if it's there.
No, I didn't do it over there.
You're still gonna wear Halloween, some kind of Halloween outfit.
So,
right?
yes, please do that.
Carrie, can you?
I'll
turn the
entertain a
camera off?
motion to go into executive session
Should I
to
just
discuss
unplug
the contractual matter.
The cameras.
Camera's still on.
Okay, yep,
Yeah,
Emily will shut that off.
Well,
She doesn't
I mean,
know.
after, I was gonna wait until after the
Or
motion.
carry it out of, okay, after skip, we have a motion by
I'll
Flora,
second it,
and we have a second.
and there's nobody that needs to be invited, right?
No one needs to be invited.
Just invite